I'm sitting cross-legged on bamboo slats 20 feet above ground, and the radio in my lap crackles with a voice I haven't heard in 3 days. The treehouse sways slightly. It always does when the wind picks up through the canopy. And I grip the wooden beam beside me, harder than necessary. My name is Kasper, and I've been living in this jungle treehouse for 62 days now, though honestly the count might be off by a few. Time does strange things when you're alone. The voice on the radio is American. Military, maybe. Hard to tell through the static. Coordinates November 7-3 Delta. Any survivors in the Cardamom range? Extraction point compromised. Repeat, extraction point compromised. Then nothing. Just the hiss of dead air and the screaming of howler monkeys somewhere to the east. I should probably start from the beginning, or at least from the point where everything stopped making sense. I was here in Cambodia working on a wildlife conservation project. Nothing glamorous, just camera trap surveys and primate behavior documentation for a university grant that barely covered expenses. The research station was about 15 kilometers north of here, deeper in the Cardamom Mountains, where the jungle gets so thick you can barely see the sky. There were 8 of us total. Dr. Oleander Finch, our lead primatologist who wore the same hemp shirt every day. Noor from Pakistan, who handled all our technical equipment. Jules from Quebec, who could identify any bird by sound alone. And 5 others whose faces I can still see clearly, but whose names catch in my throat now when I try to say them. We had no idea. That's the thing people don't understand about being deep in wilderness research. You're disconnected in ways that feel almost religious. No cell service, no internet, just a satellite phone for emergencies and a shortwave radio we'd use once a week to check in with the university. We were happy that way. I was happy that way. The morning it started, though we wouldn't know about it for another 4 days, I was up in a similar tree about 6 kilometers from here, waiting for a family of gibbons to wake up. Dawn patrol, we called it. The mist was thick enough to drink, and everything smelled like wet earth and decomposing leaves. Beautiful. Peaceful. The gibbons started their morning song around 5:47 a.m., and I recorded 8 minutes of vocalizations before climbing down, my notebook filled with observations that now mean absolutely nothing. We didn't check the radio that day, or the next. We were busy with a camera trap that had caught footage of a clouded leopard. Rare, exciting, the kind of thing that makes months of muddy camping worthwhile. Noor was obsessed with getting more footage, kept saying it could be the highlight of our data set. We spent 2 days tracking that cat, setting up additional cameras, documenting territory markers. On the 3rd day, Jules got bitten by something. Not badly, just a scratch really, from thorns while pushing through undergrowth. But the infection came fast. Too fast. Within 6 hours, his arm was swollen to twice its normal size, hot to the touch, angry red streaks racing up toward his shoulder. Dr. Finch said we needed to get him to a hospital, that this was beyond our first aid capacity. That's when we tried the satellite phone. Dead. The radio was our backup, so Noor powered it up while the rest of us tried to make Jules comfortable. He was already feverish, talking in half sentences about his daughter back in Montreal, about needing to call her for her birthday. The radio took forever to warm up. We had to run it off a generator that coughed and sputtered. And when Noor finally got it tuned to our usual emergency frequency, all we heard was screaming. Not static, screaming. A woman's voice, Thai accent, shouting in English. They're inside the building, they're inside, oh God, they're... Then nothing. We tried other frequencies. Shortwave can pick up broadcasts from all over if conditions are right, and we cycled through everything we could find. What we heard made no sense. Snippets of panic in Khmer, Chinese, Vietnamese. Someone speaking French about quarantine zones and mandatory evacuations. A British voice reading what sounded like emergency protocols. An Indian station playing what I think was religious music, then cutting to someone weeping. Zombies, Jules said from his sleeping bag. His fever had him hallucinating. It's like those movies. Zombies. We laughed. Even Dr. Finch, who never laughed at anything unprofessional, cracked a smile. The idea was absurd. We were scientists. We dealt in data and observation, not Hollywood fantasy. Jules died 17 hours later, not from the arm infection. The swelling had actually started going down after we'd pumped him full of antibiotics from our medical kit. No, he died because he stopped being Jules. One moment he was sleeping, breathing steady, color returning to his face. The next moment he was sitting up with movements that looked wrong, joints bending at angles that seemed just slightly off. And there was nothing behind his eyes. Nothing human. He bit Noor's hand when she tried to check his temperature. Really bit. Tore out a chunk of flesh between her thumb and forefinger, blood spraying across her shocked face. Then he went for Dr. Finch. I won't describe what happened next in detail. Not because I'm squeamish. 62 days up here has burned through any delicate sensibilities I had. But because some images don't need reinforcing. I'll just say that 4 of us made it out of that tent, and we ran. We ran south through jungle so thick it was like pushing through curtains of vegetation. Ran until my lungs felt like they were bleeding, until my legs stopped feeling like legs and became just mechanical systems for forward momentum. We could hear them behind us. Multiple sets of footfalls, crashing through undergrowth, making sounds that were almost human, but not quite. Like someone had taken human vocal cords and strung them too tight. I got separated from the others around noon. There was a stream, waist-deep and moving fast from recent rains. And I went across while they tried to find a better crossing point. Said I'd wait on the other side. But the things caught up to them first, and I heard Anaya screaming, then Portia, then nothing but splashing and those terrible sounds. I kept running, found this treehouse about 3 hours before sunset. Pure luck. It was a tourist setup from before. Some eco-lodge company had built a network of them through this part of the jungle, platforms connected by rope bridges, the whole wilderness retreat for wealthy foreigners experience. This one had been abandoned, probably when the first reports started coming out of Southeast Asian cities. There was even some supplies left behind. Bottled water, canned soup, a first aid kit, mosquito nets, and most importantly, a hand-crank emergency radio. The ladder leading up was one of those rope affairs, easy to pull up after me. The platform itself is maybe 10 feet by 12, bamboo construction with a canvas roof that mostly keeps rain out. There's a hammock, a small storage chest, and gaps between the floor slats wide enough to see straight down to the jungle floor. Not exactly defensible. But 20 feet up seemed safer than ground level. That first night, I cranked the radio for 30 minutes straight, my arm burning, desperate for information. What I got was fragments. A BBC World Service broadcast that cut in and out, talking about outbreak zones and containment failures across 12 countries. A staticky American Armed Forces broadcast listing evacuation points in Thailand, all of which were then listed as compromised or overrun. Someone speaking Mandarin in a voice so calm it was somehow more terrifying than the screaming. Just reading coordinates and casualty estimates like sports scores. And the infected, because that's what everyone was calling them. Infected, not zombies because we're all too sophisticated for that. They were below me. 3 of them that first night. wandering in aimless patterns around the base of my tree. I could see them in moonlight filtering through the canopy. 2 men and someone who might have been a woman, all wearing hiking gear that marked them as tourists. They'd been people with itineraries and guidebooks and plans for what to Instagram. Now they just circled, occasionally bumping into trees, heads tilting at sounds only they could hear. They didn't look up. That's what saved me, I think. Whatever part of their brain still functioned, it operated on ground level. They could hear. I learned that fast when I accidentally knocked over a water bottle and all 3 of them snapped their attention to the sound, converging on the tree base like compass needles to magnetic north. But they couldn't conceive of up. The ladder was hanging 15 feet above their reaching hands, and they just clawed at the tree trunk, making these wet, grinding sounds in their throats. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat with my back against the bamboo wall, radio clutched to my chest, listening to the world end in fragments of broadcast. Day 2 through 7 blur together. I rationed the supplies carefully: 6 bottles of water, 8 cans of soup, a bag of trail mix, some energy bars. Not enough. But I didn't know how long I'd need them to last. The infected below varied in number. Sometimes just 1 or 2, sometimes as many as dozen, drawn by sounds I couldn't identify. They'd arrive, circle for hours, then drift away to whatever called them next. The radio became my lifeline and my torment. Every few hours I'd crank it and scan frequencies, building a mental map of which stations were still broadcasting and what they were saying. There was a pattern to it, a progression I could track. Days 2 to 3. Official broadcasts. Governments trying to maintain order, evacuation instructions, quarantine protocols. A Filipino station telling everyone to proceed to designated safe zones in Manila. A Thai broadcast listing military checkpoints that were secure and maintained. Lies, probably, but official lies delivered in professional voices. Days 4-6. Unofficial broadcasts, ham radio operators, survivors broadcasting from basements or rooftops or wherever they'd barricaded themselves. These were more honest. A woman in Phnom Penh describing how the infected could smell blood from incredible distances. A man in Chiang Mai explaining that they were attracted to sound, especially certain frequencies, engine noise, screaming, music. An Australian expat in Bangkok giving detailed instructions on destroying the brain stem, speaking with the weary expertise of someone who'd done it many times. Day 7. Silence on most frequencies. Just static or emergency broadcast tones running on automatic systems. But a few voices remained. That's when I first heard the American military broadcast, repeating coordinates and extraction point information. And that's when I first heard her. The woman had an accent I couldn't place, Eastern European, maybe Russian, and she broadcasted on a frequency that seemed to shift, like she was moving between transmitters. Her English was perfect but formal, each word precisely pronounced. She called herself Zenith, which was obviously not her real name, and she provided information. This is Zenith, broadcasting to any survivors in Southeast Asian zones. Current situation update. Infection rate in urban centers exceeds 97%. Rural survival zones remain viable, but are experiencing constant incursion pressure. The infected demonstrate 3 behavioral patterns: pursuit of auditory stimuli, aggregation around light sources after dark, and dispersal during heavy rainfall. Water sources remain safe for consumption, provided standard filtration protocols are observed. The infection vector is fluid-borne: saliva, blood, other bodily fluids. Airborne transmission has not been confirmed despite early reports. Time from exposure to conversion averages 4 to 6 hours depending on wound severity and proximity to the brainstem. There is no cure. There is no treatment. There is only prevention and elimination. She'd broadcast for exactly 15 minutes, then vanish. Sometimes I'd catch her twice a day, sometimes not for days at a time. But her information was solid, practical. I started taking notes in the margins of my field notebook, filling pages with survival protocols delivered in her measured voice. The food ran out on day 9. That's when I had to get creative. The jungle provides, if you know how to ask. My background was primatology, not survival training. But I'd spent enough time observing what monkeys ate to have a decent idea of what was edible. The treehouse put me right in the canopy level, and I could reach several fruit-bearing trees from my platform. Figs, mostly, and something that looked like small mangoes, but tasted more sour. I'd wait until dawn when the infected below were least active. Zenith had mentioned they were sluggish in early morning. Some detail about how the infection affected circadian rhythms. And then I'd carefully extend myself out on the rope bridge to the neighboring tree, moving slowly, testing each board before putting weight on it. The rope bridge had been a terrifying mystery that first week. It extended from my platform to another treehouse about 30 yards away through the canopy. I'd been too afraid to explore it initially, convinced the ropes would snap or I'd lose my balance and plummet into the infected-filled jungle below. But hunger changes your calculations about risk. The second treehouse was larger, clearly meant as the main gathering point for whatever ecotourism operation had built this place. There was a table, benches, even a small cooking setup, a propane camp stove with one mostly full canister attached. More importantly, there were supplies, more bottled water, a case of instant noodles, canned fish, rice in a sealed container, cooking oil, salt, a water filter, and a metal pot. I cried when I found the rice. Just sat on the bamboo floor of that empty treehouse and cried with relief. There was also a logbook, one of those guest books where tourists write their experiences. The last entry was dated 3 days before Jules died. A German couple describing their wonderful stay, the amazing biodiversity, the knowledgeable guides, how this was the most peaceful place they'd ever been. They'd signed off with, "We'll never forget this magical place." I wondered if they'd made it out. Probably not. The third treehouse, another 40 yards along the deteriorating rope bridge system, was smaller. Just a sleeping platform, really. But it had something precious. Solar panels. Small ones, the kind meant to charge phones and cameras. They were connected to a battery pack that still showed half charge. I took the whole system back to my main treehouse, moving as carefully as someone defusing a bomb. With power, I could run the radio without endless cranking. With power, I had light at night. The rope bridges became my highways. There were 6 treehouses total in this network I eventually discovered, strung through the canopy in a rough circle about a 1/4 mile in circumference. 2 were completely collapsed, rope bridges hanging in useless tangles. But the other 4 were accessible with care, and each had something useful. Treehouse 4 gave me a machete someone had left behind, rusted but functional. Treehouse 6 had camping gear including a better hammock and a tarp that didn't leak. I became skilled at moving through the canopy, learned which ropes could still take weight and which were rotting through. Learned to move in the early morning when the infected below were scattered and sluggish. Learned to harvest rainwater using the tarp, letting it funnel into bottles and the metal pot. Learned to cook rice quietly, using the smallest flame possible, eating before dawn when the smoke would dissipate into mist rather than form visible columns. The infected below became almost routine. I started recognizing individuals. There was one I called Hiking Boots because of his bright red footwear. He showed up almost daily. following some pattern I couldn't discern. There was Ponytail, a woman whose hair had somehow remained neatly tied back, despite everything else about her being destroyed. And there was the one I called Screamer, because unlike the others who mostly made those grinding throat sounds, this one would periodically just shriek, long, piercing wails that sent birds exploding from the canopy and brought more infected running. I learned their patterns. They were attracted to sound, yes, but not all sound equally. Bird calls didn't interest them. Monkey screams did, a little. But human sounds, coughing, speaking, metal clanging against metal, those brought them like moths to flame. They could climb, but poorly. I saw one try to follow a spider monkey up a tree trunk once. It made it about 6 feet before losing its grip and falling, landing with a sound like a bag of wet cement hitting pavement. It got up and kept walking. They didn't need food, or they didn't need much. I never saw one eat, though occasionally I'd find remains. Bones picked clean, bits of cloth and hair scattered around. But mostly they just wandered. Zenith had said they were ambulatory vectors seeking hosts, which was clinical and accurate, and completely failed to capture how deeply wrong they looked when they moved. Day 14 brought rain. Not the brief afternoon showers common in the jungle, but a solid 3-day deluge that turned the world into curtains of water. The infected disappeared almost entirely during heavy rain. Zenith had been right about that too. They retreated into thick vegetation or under fallen logs, going into some kind of dormancy. I used the opportunity to forage on the ground for the first time since arriving. The jungle floor was a different world, darker, damper, everything rotting and growing in complicated layers. I found mushrooms I recognized as edible from field guides, growing in clusters on dead wood. Found a patch of wild ginger. Discovered a stream not far from my tree network, flowing fast and clear over smooth stones. I filled every container I had, knowing the water filter would make it safe. I also found signs of other survivors. Footprints, human ones, in mud near the stream. Fresh enough that the rain hadn't completely washed them away. Boot treads heading west. And a campsite, or what remained of one. A circle of stones that had been a fire pit, some torn plastic sheeting, broken bamboo that might have been shelter supports. No bodies, no blood, no indication whether whoever had been here left voluntarily or otherwise. I should have felt hope. Other people meant the possibility of cooperation, shared resources, information. Instead, I felt dread. Because other people also meant competition, conflict, unpredictability. Up in my Treehouse network, I'd achieved a kind of equilibrium, a sustainable routine. Other people would complicate that. I left a note anyway. Carved it into a tree trunk with a machete. K, in trees above, friendly, radio frec 7.255 MHz after dark. No one ever called. The radio broadcasts continued to evolve. By day 20, most of the official channels had gone silent. The BBC World Service played the same recorded message on loop. Seek shelter in place. Avoid contact with infected individuals. Boil all water. Conserve resources. Help is coming. The American military broadcast had stopped listing extraction points and started just repeating a series of alphanumeric codes I couldn't decipher. But the survivor broadcasts expanded. I learned to recognize regulars. There was a man calling himself Cardinal, who broadcasted from somewhere in the Vietnamese highlands, giving weather reports and warnings about infected herd movements. Apparently they did herd, or aggregate at least. Thousands moving together in loose groups that flattened everything in their path. There was a woman named Sable somewhere in Thailand running what she called a radio beacon for survivors, connecting people trying to find each other, passing messages between isolated groups. And there was Zenith, still broadcasting her precise information updates. By week 3, I'd heard her enough to detect patterns. She broadcasted at dawn and dusk most reliably. Her information was always tactical, never personal. She mentioned infection rates and behavioral patterns and survival strategies, but never said where she was, how many people were with her, or anything about herself. This is Zenith with Critical Update. Her voice crackled through my radio on day 23. New infection variant has been observed in northern Thailand and southern China, designated Delta 7. This variant demonstrates enhanced auditory sensitivity and limited problem-solving capacity. Confirmed instances of Delta 7 infected using tools, rocks to break barriers, sticks to probe spaces. They also demonstrate pack coordination beyond random aggregation. If you observe infected acting in organized groups, consider your position compromised and relocate immediately. I repeat, organized behavior indicates Delta 7 presence. I looked down through the gaps in my bamboo floor. 8 infected below at the moment, all wandering in their usual aimless patterns. None of them looked organized, but the thought of them learning, adapting, made my hands shake as I adjusted the radio antenna. Day 27 brought visitors. I woke to voices, human voices, speaking Khmer. 2 men moving through the jungle below, both carrying rifles, both looking exhausted. They were checking the infected bodies, I realized. Shooting the ones that got close, but mostly just avoiding them. Moving with the practiced caution of people who'd been surviving like this for a while. I should have called out to them. Should have offered the shelter of my Treehouse network, shared my supplies and information. But something stopped me. Maybe it was how they moved, constantly scanning, rifles always ready. Maybe it was the backpacks they carried, bulging with supplies that looked looted from multiple sources. Or maybe it was just that I'd been alone so long that the thought of human interaction filled me with more anxiety than the infected ever had. I stayed silent, watched them pass below, heading east toward the stream I'd found. They never looked up. That night I heard gunfire. Distant but sustained. Automatic weapons. Then screaming. Then silence. The next morning, 4 new infected wandered into my area. One of them wore a rifle on a strap across its back, the weapon banging against its legs as it walked in circles. I never saw the other man. The food situation had stabilized by the end of month 1. I had a routine. Wake before dawn, check the solar battery charge, scan radio frequencies for updates, eat a small meal of rice and whatever fruit or mushrooms I'd foraged. During morning hours, I'd move through the Treehouse network, checking ropes, collecting rainwater, harvesting what the canopy provided. Afternoons I'd avoid moving. The infected were most active then, and the rope bridges were most visible in direct sunlight. Evenings I'd cook dinner. Always rice-based because rice was my most plentiful resource, supplemented with canned fish when I wanted protein or foraged greens when I could find them. Nights were for the radio. I discovered that broadcasts came clearest after dark. Something about atmospheric conditions, signals bouncing off the ionosphere. I'd sit in my hammock, solar-powered lamp giving just enough light to take notes, and scan through frequencies methodically, building my mental map of who was still out there, still broadcasting, still alive. Cardinal was my favorite. His voice had a rough quality, like he'd been a smoker, and he told stories between his tactical updates. About the group he was with. 17 people holed up in a temple complex in the Vietnamese mountains. About their attempts to grow food, their failed efforts to make contact with any official rescue operations, their small victories and devastating losses. 3 people bitten in week 1. 2 more lost to dysentery. 1 woman who'd simply walked into the infected herd one morning while everyone slept. And they still didn't know if it was accident or choice. We're doing okay, though. Cardinal's voice crackled on day 31. Rice harvest was better than expected. Got the water filtration working properly. Even found some coffee, real coffee, in an abandoned village supply cache. Life's little miracles, right? If anyone's hearing this in the Cardamom province area, we're here. We're surviving. You can too. His broadcasts made me feel less alone, which was dangerous. Loneliness makes you careless, makes you consider risks you shouldn't. Like trying to hike 15 kilometers through infected-filled jungle to find a group of strangers who might not even want another mouth to feed. Sable was different. She broadcasted constantly, a stream of consciousness mixed with practical information. This is Sable on the Survivor Network. If anyone knows the status of the evacuation point at Surat Thani Airport, please respond. We've got a group trying to reach the coast, need to know if boats are still running. Also, Flint, if you're hearing this, your sister made it to the Chiang Mai group. She's safe. She's asking for you. Please respond if you can. And reminder to everyone, infected are attracted to generator noise. Use solar where possible. Hand crank where necessary. Stay quiet. Stay alive. I never broadcasted myself. Part of me wanted to be part of that network of voices, to contribute my observations, to feel connected to the scattered remnants of humanity. But broadcasting meant revealing myself. Meant other people knowing there was someone alone in the Cardamom jungle with supplies and a decent defensive position. And I'd seen enough, the men with rifles, the looted campsites, to know that post-apocalypse didn't automatically mean cooperation. Day 37 brought the first real test of my defenses. A herd came through. Not the aimless wanderers I'd grown used to, but hundreds of them, moving together through the jungle like a slow-motion avalanche. I heard them coming for an hour before I saw them. Branches breaking, constant rustling, and underneath it all this sound like wind through a tunnel, which I realized was their breathing. Hundreds of destroyed lungs pushing air in and out. They came from the north, following the path of a dried stream bed. I pulled up all the rope ladders I could reach, securing them to the platform with extra knots. Then I just sat, silent, barely breathing, watching the canopy-level view of something that should not exist. So many, too many to count. Men, women, children, or what they'd been before. All moving together in roughly the same direction, navigating obstacles with more coordination than the isolated wanderers ever showed. Some wore hiking gear like they'd been tourists. Others had the simple clothes of rural farmers. One figure near the front wore a police uniform, utility belt still attached, empty holster slapping against its leg. They took 3 hours to pass. 3 hours of sitting absolutely frozen while hundreds of infected flowed beneath my trees like a river of decay. Some bumped against the tree trunks. One paused directly below me, head tilted back, and I knew, it was looking up. But its eyes were clouded white. And after a moment it simply shuffled on, following the herd. When they'd passed and the jungle fell silent again, I vomited over the side of the platform. Then I cranked the radio with shaking hands until I got Zenith's frequency. "Please be there," I whispered. "Please." Static, more static. Then, "This is Zenith. Scheduled broadcast beginning." "I just saw a herd," I said to the radio, even though I couldn't transmit. "Hundreds of them, moving together. Is that normal? Is that Delta 7? Obviously, she couldn't hear me. But she continued as if answering, Large-scale infected aggregations have been observed across all zones, group sizes ranging from 50 to 5,000 individuals. Movement appears directed toward population centers or large sound sources. Survivors should avoid these aggregations at all costs. Engagement is not recommended. Concealment is optimal strategy. Groups typically pass through an area in 4 to 6 hours, unless attracted by stimuli. After passage, area remains dangerous due to stragglers and attracted individuals. As if on cue, I heard sounds below. 2 infected, maybe 3, moving slowly through the area the herd had vacated, as stragglers, just like she'd said. "How do you know all this?" I asked the radio. "Who are you?" But her broadcast had ended, replaced by static. The herd's passage changed things. Before, I'd felt relatively secure in my canopy network. After, I understood how fragile that security was. If even 5% of that herd had decided to stay, to circle my trees, I'd have been trapped until they lost interest or I died of thirst. My position was defensible against 1s and 2s, maybe against a dozen, but not against hundreds. I needed mobility, needed an escape plan beyond just stay quiet and hope they leave. The vehicle idea came from Cardinal. On day 42, he mentioned his group's efforts to armor a truck, welding scrap metal to a pickup frame, reinforcing windows, adding rams to the front bumper. "It's not pretty," his voice crackled, "but it's functional. Punched through a group of infected yesterday to reach a supply cache. The key is noise management. Engine roar attracts them, but if you're moving fast enough, you're past before they can converge." I had no truck, no welding equipment, no scrap metal. What I had was jungle, bamboo, and the scattered remains of civilization. But the idea took root. There was a logging road about 2 kilometers west. I'd seen it on the survey maps back at the research station, though I'd never actually used it. Logging had been shut down in this area years ago when the conservation zones were established. But the roads remained. Overgrown, deteriorating, but potentially passable. And where there were logging roads, there were vehicles. Maybe. I spent day 43 observing. Up before dawn, I climbed to the highest point I could safely reach in my main tree, about 30 feet above the platform. From there, with the compact binoculars I'd found in Treehouse 4, I could see gaps in the canopy where the logging road cut through. And there, maybe 2.5 kilometers west, visible as a color-wrong shape among the greens and browns, was something mechanical. Planning the expedition took a week. I couldn't just climb down and walk 2 kilometers through infected-filled jungle. I needed a route, a timeline, contingencies. I used notebook paper to sketch maps from memory and observation, marking where I'd seen infected congregate, where the thickest vegetation offered concealment, where streams might mask sound. I crafted a spear from bamboo and the machete, not much of a weapon against infected, but better than nothing. Filled a small backpack with essentials: water, energy bars, the hand crank radio, basic first aid. Wore dark clothing, multiple layers despite the heat. Figuring coverage was worth discomfort. Most importantly, I waited for rain. The monsoon season was reaching its peak, and heavy downpours came almost daily. During the worst weather, the infected went dormant. That was my window. Day 51 brought the perfect conditions. The sky opened up around 10 a.m., and within minutes the jungle was a roaring curtain of water. I gave it 30 minutes to make sure the rain was steady, then descended the rope ladder for the first time in 44 days. The ground felt wrong. Solid but unstable, mud sucking at my boots. The canopy had been my world for so long that ground-level perspective was disorienting. Everything too close, sight lines too short, the sense of vulnerability overwhelming. I moved slowly, testing each step, following my planned route. Visibility was maybe 20 feet through the rain. Everything was gray and green and moving. Water ran down my face, into my eyes, made the machete grip slippery in my hand. The first infected I encountered was sheltering under a fallen log, motionless except for shallow breathing. I gave it a wide berth, moving through undergrowth so slowly I probably covered 50 meters in 10 minutes. The rain was my ally. It masked my sounds, kept the infected sluggish, but it also made movement treacherous. Twice I nearly fell, catching myself on vines that could have been snakes for all I could see clearly. The logging road appeared suddenly, a gap in the trees, the ground harder, covered in weeds, but still distinctly road-shaped. And there, about 300 meters north, was the vehicle I'd seen from the canopy. A truck. Old, probably Thai-made, the kind used for hauling logs. It sat tilted at an angle, rear wheels in a drainage ditch, cabin doors hanging open. Even from a distance, I could see it was damaged. Windshield cracked, hood propped up, rust and jungle claiming it. But it was a vehicle, a possibility. I approached from downwind. Did infected even use smell? Zenith had never mentioned it, but better safe, keeping low, using every bit of cover. No infected visible near the truck, though I spotted two about 100 meters south on the road, standing in the rain like broken mannequins. The cabin was empty, except for leaves and bird droppings. Keys still in the ignition. When I turned them, nothing happened. No sound, no dashboard lights, nothing. The battery was long dead, if it even still existed. Popping the hood, slowly, quietly, aware that metal scraping metal might carry even through rain, revealed an engine stripped of several key components. Someone had been here before me, salvaged parts. But the frame was solid. The bed was intact. The tires, though flat, were present. I spent an hour searching the area around the truck, finding what I'd hoped for. More vehicles. The logging company had apparently used this as a staging area. 2 more trucks, both in worse condition than the first. A forklift, tipped on its side, more rust than metal. And partially hidden under a collapsed canvas shelter, a smaller vehicle, something between an ATV and a miniature truck, with a roll cage frame and knobby tires. This one had been better protected. The engine was intact. The battery was missing, but the wiring looked salvageable. It was small enough that I could potentially push it if needed, light enough that I might be able to repair it with basic tools. The rain was lessening. I could feel the infected becoming more active, even without seeing them. A change in the jungle's sound, a sense of movement at the edges of perception. Time to return. I made it back to my tree network without incident, though I saw more infected on the return journey, 7 distinct individuals, all making their way somewhere, drawn by something I couldn't hear. By the time I pulled up the rope ladder and collapsed in my hammock, shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion, the rain had stopped completely. That night I drew plans. The small vehicle, I'd started thinking of it as my escape route, needed 4 things: power, fuel, armor, and a destination. Power meant a battery. Fuel meant finding gasoline or diesel, probably in old supply caches or abandoned vehicles. Armor meant improvisation. And destination meant deciding where the hell I was trying to go. "This is Cardinal," the radio announced during my evening scan. "Day 68 for us. Had to execute one of ours today. Infected bite we didn't catch in time. She turned while sleeping. Killed Tan before we could put her down." This is how it happens, folks. One moment of carelessness, one oversight. If anyone's listening, check bite wounds daily. Twice daily if you can. Feel for heat, watch for swelling, track behavior changes. And don't wait once symptoms start. Don't make it harder than it has to be. His voice cracked on the last sentence, then static. I thought about Jules, about how we'd laughed at the idea of zombies. How quickly laughter turned to screaming. Day 53 through 60 became battery hunting days. During rain, I'd venture out to the logging road staging area, searching methodically through the wrecked vehicles and collapsed structures. Found a toolbox rusted shut that took me 30 minutes to pry open, revealing wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, treasure beyond measure. Found a jerry can with maybe 2 liters of diesel sloshing in the bottom, though fuel that old was questionable at best. Found a battery in one of the larger trucks, corroded and probably dead, but possibly rechargeable with the solar panels. I also found bodies, 3 of them in what had been a storage shed. Human definitely, though decomposition and the jungle made determining much else impossible. No signs of infection, no bites I could see. They'd died here, maybe from disease or injury or just giving up. One still wore a name tag, Dang, warehouse supervisor. I didn't bury them. Couldn't risk the time, the noise, the effort. But I did close the shed door when I left, which felt like something. The battery became my project. I hauled it back to the Treehouse network over 2 trips, wrapped in canvas to protect my hands from acid residue. My solar setup could theoretically charge it, but slowly, and I'd need to rewire connections I only partially understood. Noor would have known how to do this in 5 minutes. Noor, who'd been torn apart by what used to be Jules. I worked on it in the mornings, following diagrams I half remembered from field equipment maintenance. Stripped wires, cleaned contacts, jury-rigged a charging system using the solar battery pack as intermediary. On day 61, I connected everything and waited. The battery indicator on the solar pack started dropping, slowly, which meant current was flowing, which meant maybe, possibly, this could work. "This is Zenith," the radio announced that evening. Critical intelligence update. Infected populations in coastal regions are decreasing. Repeat, coastal regions showing decreased infected density. Analysis suggests mass drowning events in high tide areas and coastal storms. Island locations demonstrate highest survival probability for long-term sustainability. Mainland survivors should consider coastal migration when feasible. However, note that boats and docks attract infected due to sound and movement. Water crossings must be planned for low infection hours, preferably early morning or during rain. Coastal migration. Islands. The sea was maybe 80 kilometers south. Might as well be 1,000. But it was a destination, a goal beyond just surviving one more day. I started modifying my plans. The small vehicle, assuming I could get it running, wouldn't make it 80 kilometers. But it could get me to a road, and roads led to other vehicles, other supplies. And every kilometer south was potentially a kilometer closer to survival. That meant more than just not dying. Day 67 brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Other voices on my frequency. I'd been scanning as usual when I heard something that wasn't Cardinal or Sable or Zenith. A young voice, male, speaking English with a thick accent. I thought might be Burmese. "Hello? Is anyone there? This is Riven broadcasting from Sram Bell. We are 7 people. We need help. If anyone hears, please. The infected are everywhere. We're running out of water. The store is not safe anymore. Is anyone there?" I grabbed my radio, finger hovering over the transmit button. 7 people. Running out of water. Sri Ambul was a town maybe 30 kilometers southwest. Not close, but not impossibly far. "Please," Riven's voice continued. "We have children. 2 children. We need help." My finger stayed on the button, not pressing. What could I do? I had no vehicle, no weapons beyond a machete and bamboo spear, no way to fight through infected-filled territory. Going to them would likely mean dying with them. But I could give them information. Zenith's protocols, Cardinal's strategies, the frequencies where Sable connected survivors. I pressed the button. Riven, this is Kasper. I hear you. I'm north of your position, maybe 30 kilometers. I can't reach you, but I can help with information. Are you listening? Static. Long enough that I thought maybe he hadn't heard. Then, yes, I hear you. You're the first person who's answered. Please, I need you to listen carefully, I interrupted. Don't broadcast about water or supplies. Others might hear, others who aren't friendly. Save battery power. Use rain to collect water, tarps, sheets, anything that channels to containers. Boil it if you can. But even unboiled rainwater is safer than infected, contaminated sources. I spent 20 minutes passing on everything I'd learned from Zenith and Cardinal. About infected behavior patterns, optimal movement times, sound discipline, hygiene protocols. Riven asked questions. Where was I? Could I come? Did I know if rescue was coming? And I answered what I could. Avoided what I couldn't. The evacuation points are gone, I told him. Government structure is collapsed. It's just survivors now, pockets of people holding on. There's a group in Vietnam, temple complex in the mountains. Another group in northern Thailand. People are making it, but there's no rescue coming. You have to save yourselves. How? His voice was younger than I'd thought initially. Maybe 18, 19. We're just shop workers and a teacher. We don't know how to survive this. Neither did I said. But you learn. You have to. We talked for another 10 minutes before he had to go. Battery dying, he said. I gave him Cardinal's frequency and Sable's. Told him to check in daily if he could. That the survivor network could help more than I could alone. After he signed off, I sat in my hammock feeling the weight of those words. We have children. 2 children, somewhere in Sri Ambul, surrounded by infected, depending on a 19-year-old shop worker and a teacher to keep them alive. I didn't sleep well that night. Riven broadcasted every day after that, usually brief check-ins. Their situation deteriorated. Water they'd collected was contaminated. Someone got sick, dysentery probably. The store's back door had been damaged when infected pressed against it. They could hear them on the other side, dozens of them, drawn by something. On day 70, Riven's broadcast was different. Kasper, are you there? We need to leave. The door won't hold another day. We're going to try to reach the harbor. There might be boats. Can you talk me through it? How to move quietly. I'm scared. The children are scared. I press transmit. I'm here. I'll help. When are you moving? Tomorrow. Dawn, during rain if it comes. Good. That's good. Rain is your friend. I took a breath, organizing thoughts. Listen carefully. Move slowly. Infected respond to speed and sound more than sight. If you have cloth, wrap it around anything that might clang or rattle. Avoid talking. Use hand signals. Single file with the strongest people front and back. Put the children in the middle. Don't run unless you absolutely have to, because running makes noise and attracts more. We planned for an hour. Escape route options, contingencies. What to do if separated. I passed on every bit of knowledge I'd accumulated, channeling Zenith's precise protocols and Cardinal's practical experience. Thank you, Riven said finally. If we make it, I'll find you someday. I'll bring you to whatever safe place we find. I'll look forward to that, I lied gently. Because I knew the statistics, Knew that 7 people moving through infected territory with 2 children had maybe a 15% chance. And even if they made it to the harbor, boats meant fuel and navigation and 100 other complications. The next morning, I stayed by the radio, scanning frequencies, waiting. Heard nothing. At noon, still nothing. Evening brought only static and distant broadcasts. Sable connecting other survivors. Cardamom reporting on failed rice harvest. Zenith providing her measured intelligence updates. Day 72. Still no word from Riven. Day 73, the Suriamble frequency broadcast something. Not Riven's voice, but someone speaking Khmer. Rapid fire, panicked. Then screaming. Then the wet sounds I'd learned to recognize, then static. I didn't try to broadcast to them again. The battery was holding a charge by day 75. Not a full charge. The solar panels couldn't provide enough current for that. But enough to turn over a small engine. Maybe. Possibly. If everything else worked, which was a massive assumption. I needed to test it at the vehicle, which meant hauling the battery 2 kilometers through jungle. Which meant another expedition during rain, more hours of vulnerability on the ground. I waited for the right weather. Day 78 brought it. A morning storm that turned noon black. Rain hammering the canopy with force that made me worry about the solar panels. I wrapped the battery in canvas and plastic, rigged a carrying system from rope, and descended. The ground was a swamp. Water flowed in sheets, finding every depression, turning paths into streams. I moved by feel as much as sight, following landmarks I'd memorized, a distinctively bent tree, a cluster of rocks, a dead log that looked like a sleeping crocodile. Took me 3 hours to reach the logging road. The small vehicle was where I'd left it, somehow looking more decrepit than I remembered. I installed the battery with hands that shook from cold and adrenaline, connected wires according to my best guess of proper configuration, prayed to gods I didn't believe in. Turned the key. Nothing. Checked connections. Turned again. Click, single click, then nothing. Not enough charge, wrong wiring, dead engine. I had no way to diagnose. The rain was lessening. I could feel it in the air pressure. The way sound was changing. I needed to return to the trees before the infected woke fully, but I couldn't leave the battery. It represented weeks of work, the only power source I'd found. I couldn't haul it back through jungle in current conditions. Too heavy, too far, too dangerous. I made a decision that was probably stupid. I stayed. There was a cargo container near the logging trucks, one of those metal shipping containers repurposed for storage. The door was rusted and hanging at an angle, but the interior was relatively dry. I hauled the battery inside, covered it with canvas, then searched the immediate area for anything useful. Found another jerry can, this one with maybe 4 liters of diesel. Found a tarp that wasn't completely shredded. Found vehicle manuals in a waterproof case, useless for someone who couldn't read Thai technical diagrams. But I took them anyway because paper was precious. Night came while I was searching, sudden and complete the way it does in jungle. I had no light. Bringing the solar lamp had seemed too risky, too visible. The cargo container was pitch black, smelling of rust and mildew and something organic that had died in one corner. I sat with my back against the metal wall, machete across my lap, listening to the jungle wake up outside. The infected moved more at night. I'd observed that from my treehouse, but never experienced it at ground level. The sounds were different here, closer, more distinct. Footsteps shuffling through leaves, bodies bumping against trees, that grinding throat sound they made, like breathing through gravel. Something walked past the container, close enough that I heard individual footfalls. Heard fabric dragging against undergrowth, It paused at the doorway. I could see its silhouette against the slightly less dark outside, a human-shaped thing standing absolutely still. I held my breath. The machete handle was slick with sweat in my grip. It stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably 1. Then it moved on, following whatever stimulus drove its movement. I didn't sleep. Just sat in that metal box, listening to the infected world outside, thinking about Riven and the children and everyone else who hadn't made it. Thinking about Jules and how quickly he'd stopped being human. Thinking about the small vehicle that wouldn't start and the battery that wasn't strong enough and the 80 kilometers to a coast that might not offer any more safety than here. Dawn came gradually. Gray light filtering through the doorway. I waited until I heard birds. Birds meant the infected were less active, meant the jungle was relatively safe. Then I checked the battery charge with a small voltmeter I'd found in the toolbox. 7 volts. The battery was 12 volt nominal. Not enough. Needed more solar charging time. I hiked back to the Treehouse network, exhausted and discouraged. Pulled up the rope ladder, collapsed in my hammock, and slept through most of the day. That evening, Cardinal's broadcast was different. This is Cardinal. This will be my last broadcast from this location. We're moving out. The temple's been compromised. Too many infected finding their way up the mountain. Lost 3 more people yesterday when a herd came through. We're down to 11 now, and we've decided to try for the coast. Zenith's information about island safety makes sense. We're going to find boats, find an island, find somewhere we can actually build instead of just hiding. He paused. I heard voices in the background, someone saying something urgent. We leave tomorrow. If anyone's in the Kontum or Pleiku area, avoid Route 14. It's completely overrun. Stick to mountain trails. And if you're listening, thank you. Talking to the radio, knowing someone might hear, has kept me sane these months. Stay alive out there. Find the islands. We'll see you there. Static. I tried his frequency again the next evening. Nothing. And the next day. Silence. Sable reported it 3 days later. Confirmed reports of the Cardinal Group's departure from the temple location. No subsequent contact established. If anyone encounters this group or has information, please relay. They were 17 when they started. This is what survival looks like. Constant movement, constant loss, but also constant trying. Never stop trying. Day 83 through 95 became my battery charging and vehicle preparation period. I'd haul the battery back to the treehouse, charge it on solar for a week, haul it back to the logging site during the next rain, try again. Each trip was a risk. Each time I descended to ground level, I gambled that the infected wouldn't be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The second attempt, the engine turned over. Coughed once, sputtered, died. Progress. Third attempt brought 2 full rotations before dying. The engine wasn't seized, it was functional, just not getting fuel or spark properly. Fourth attempt, on day 95. The engine caught, ran rough, black smoke pouring from the exhaust, sounding like it was chewing its own gears. But it ran. For 30 glorious seconds before I killed it, terrified the noise would bring every infected within 5 kilometers. But it ran. Now came the hard part. Armor, fuel, and actually getting myself from the treehouse to the vehicle without dying in the process. The armor question had a surprisingly elegant solution. Bamboo. The jungle was full of it, and bamboo was stronger than most people realized. Fibrous, flexible, capable of absorbing impacts. I spent days cutting bamboo poles of similar dimensions, hauling them to the logging site, lashing them to the vehicle's roll cage with wire and rope I'd scavenged. The result looked ridiculous, like someone had built a mobile bamboo fort. But it was functional. The poles created a cage around the cabin that would prevent infected from reaching me easily, and the flexibility meant they'd absorb impacts rather than crumple. Fuel was harder. The diesel I'd found was old, possibly contaminated, definitely not enough for a long journey. I needed to locate more supplies, which meant exploring further from my safe zone. Day 103, I found a ranger station about 3 kilometers east. Partially collapsed, thoroughly looted, but still containing a few useful items. A chainsaw with a full fuel tank, a first aid kit with antibiotics, a machete sharper than mine, and maps. Detailed topographical maps of the region, showing roads, trails, settlements. The maps changed everything. I could see patterns now, where population centers had been, where roads led, where the coast actually was. 80 kilometers had been a guess. The maps showed it was more like 95, following roads. But they also showed alternatives. A river running roughly south that led to coastal lowlands, old logging roads that paralleled the main highway. I traced possible routes with my finger, calculating distances, evaluating risks. Every route meant days of travel through infected territory. Every road assumed the vehicle would keep running, that I wouldn't get stranded, that I'd find more fuel along the way. But it was a plan. A real plan. Not just survival, but actual movement towards something. Day 108 brought visitors to my treehouse area. I heard them before I saw them. Voices, human voices, speaking English with various accents. A group, maybe 5 or 6 people, moving through the jungle with less caution than they should. I watched from my platform as they emerged into the small clearing below. 6 of them, 4 men, 2 women, armed with a mix of weapons, a rifle, 2 machetes, what looked like a homemade spear. They wore hiking gear, carried backpacks, moved with the exhausted determination of people who'd been traveling hard. They stopped near my tree, the one with the pulled-up rope ladder. "This looks recent," one of the men said, examining rope marks on the trunk. British accent. "Someone's been here." "Could be abandoned," a woman replied. "American, maybe Southern. Lots of people started tree camps early on. Most didn't last." "Should we check?" Another man, younger, accent I couldn't place. "How?" The British one gestured up. "Ladder's gone. If someone's up there, they clearly don't want company." They were right below me. I could see the tops of their heads through gaps in the bamboo floor. Could smell them. Sweat and dirt and wood smoke. One of the women had red hair tied back in a braid. The British man had a scar across his neck that looked recent. I stayed silent. "Let's keep moving," the older woman said. She seemed to be the leader. "We need to cover another 10 kilometers before dark. Find the river you mentioned." "The map shows settlements along the river," Scarred Neck said. "Might be supplies. Might be infected. Definitely infected. Question is how many." They moved on, heading south. I watched them disappear into the undergrowth, then listened until I couldn't hear their voices anymore. Part of me wanted to call out, to join them. 6 people had better odds than 1. Safety in numbers, shared resources, human contact. But I'd seen what happened to groups. The Cardinals 17 becoming 11, becoming gone. Riven's 7, probably dead in Suriambul. Groups attracted attention, created noise, made survival more complicated, even as they made it emotionally easier. And I had a plan now. A vehicle, a route, a destination. Adding 5 strangers to that equation changed all the variables. I stayed in my tree. That night, Zenith's broadcast included new information. Critical update regarding coastal zones. Naval evacuation operations have ceased. Repeat, naval evacuation operations are no longer occurring. However, island populations remain viable. Smaller islands demonstrate successful long-term survivor communities. Key factors. Infected cannot swim effectively. They wade into water, but lack coordination for swimming. Salt water appears to accelerate decomposition of infected tissue. Islands with freshwater sources and agricultural potential offer highest survival probability. Mainland survivors should prioritize boat acquisition and coastal navigation. Island survival. It was becoming the goal, the thing everyone still alive was moving toward. I marked the maps, circling locations along the coast where boats might be found. Harbors, fishing villages, marinas. Day 112, I made my final supply run from the Treehouse network. Stripped everything useful, the solar panels, the battery pack, all remaining food, the water filter, the better machete, the first aid kit, fire starting equipment, rope, the hand crank radio, maps, notebooks. Packed it all into the largest backpack I'd found, plus 2 additional bags rigged as side packs. The load was absurd, probably 40 kilograms total, but I couldn't make multiple trips. Once I left for the vehicle, I was leaving the Treehouse network for good. I took one last look around my platform. 62 days I'd spent here initially. Then, all the days after as I prepared to leave, nearly 4 months total. This bamboo structure had saved my life, given me time to think and plan and learn how to survive. I carved one more message into the bamboo support beam. K. Made it to day 112. Heading for coast. If you find this, good luck. Stay in trees. Check radio frec 7.255. Then I descended the rope ladder for the last time. The hike to the logging site took 4 hours with my heavy load. Twice I had to stop and redistribute weight when straps cut off circulation. Once I had to hide, pressed against a tree trunk with my backpack, feeling like it would pull me over backward, while 3 infected shuffled past within arm's reach. But I made it. The vehicle sat where I'd left it, my ridiculous bamboo armor looking even more absurd in daylight. I loaded my supplies into the cargo area, strapped everything down with rope and wire, double-checked fuel level, oil level, every connection I could see. The battery was at 9 volts. Not ideal, but better than 7. I'd have to start the engine and let it charge while running. I climbed into the driver's seat. The cabin smelled like mildew and old vinyl. The steering wheel had split grips, foam showing through. The gear shift was loose, but it was transportation. It was escape. I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, caught, ran rough for 10 seconds that felt like eternity, then smoothed out slightly. Black smoke poured from the exhaust. The whole vehicle vibrated like it might shake apart. But it ran. I let it idle for 5 minutes, checking gauges that mostly didn't work. Fuel gauge showed a quarter tank, probably optimistic. Temperature gauge climbed steadily, but stayed below red. No obvious leaks or failures. Time to test mobility. I put it in gear, clutch stiff, gearbox grinding, and gave it gas. The vehicle lurched forward, engine revving angry and loud. Bamboo armor rattled. The steering pulled hard, left. But it moved. I drove in a slow circle around the logging site, getting a feel for the controls. The brakes were spongy but functional. The steering required constant correction. Speed was limited. Probably couldn't top 40 kilometers per hour, even on smooth road. But compared to walking, it was miraculous. Then I heard them. The engine noise had done what I'd feared. From multiple directions, infected emerged from the jungle. First one, then 5, then a dozen, moving faster than I'd seen them move before, drawn by the mechanical roar like moths to fire. I turned the vehicle toward the logging road, heading south, and accelerated as much as the protesting engine would allow. The first infected reached me as I passed. A man in rotted clothing who grabbed at the bamboo armor and got dragged several meters before falling away. Another came at me from the side, slamming into the bamboo cage with force that made the whole structure shudder. But the armor held, and I kept moving. The logging road was worse than I'd hoped. Rutted, overgrown, blocked in places by fallen branches. I crashed through obstacles, bamboo screeching against tree trunks, infected grabbing at the vehicle from both sides. The engine screamed. The gearbox ground. I expected catastrophic failure at any second. But kilometer by kilometer, I put distance between myself and the logging site. After about 5 kilometers, the infected fell behind. They couldn't match even my slow speed. The road opened up slightly, following what my map showed as a dried riverbed. I risked accelerating to maybe 25 kilometers per hour. Felt like flying after months of walking pace. The fuel gauge was dropping, not plummeting, but steadily declining. I had maybe 2 hours of driving before running dry. Possibly less. I needed to find more fuel, and I needed to find it soon. The map showed a settlement about 12 kilometers south, a small village that had served the logging operations. Population maybe 200 before. Now, probably nothing living. But villages meant vehicles, storage sheds, possibly fuel caches. The road deteriorated as I drove. Several times I had to stop and clear obstacles, fallen trees, washed out sections, one place where a landslide had covered half the road. Each stop was tense, engine idling loud enough to attract attention. Me working frantically with the machete and chainsaw I'd found, glancing constantly at the jungle edges for movement. Infected appeared at 2 of the stops. Just a few, drawn by the noise. I stayed in the vehicle, revving the engine when they got close, using sound to keep them at arm's length while I worked. It was terrifying and tedious. Clear an obstacle, infected approach, rev engine to scare them back, clear more, repeat. But it worked. The village appeared around a bend in the road, a scatter of buildings in various states of decay, some collapsed, some still standing, all silent. I stopped at the edge, engine idling, and studied the scene through my bamboo-framed view. No obvious movement, but that meant nothing. Infected could stay motionless for hours, conserving energy, waiting for stimulus. I needed fuel, needed supplies, but driving into the village center felt like driving into a trap. The roads were narrow between buildings, plenty of places for infected to lurk. If the vehicle stalled or got stuck, I'd be finished. I made a decision. Quick perimeter check. Identify targets. Get in and get out fast. And I drove slowly around the village edge, staying on wider roads, engine rumbling. Several buildings looked promising. A garage with corrugated metal doors, a shop that might have been a general store, a compound that could have been a warehouse, and infected. Lots of them. I counted at least 30, scattered through the village. Some wandering, some standing motionless, some pressed against building walls for reasons I couldn't determine. The engine noise was attracting their attention. Heads turned toward me. Bodies shifted orientation. I needed to commit or leave. The garage was most promising. Closest to the village edge, single story, large doors that might contain vehicles and fuel. I turned toward it, accelerating as much as I dared. Infected began moving toward the sound, converging from multiple directions. I hit the garage doors doing maybe 15 kilometers per hour. The bamboo armor took most of the impact, flexing, a few poles snapping but holding together. The doors, rusted, rotting, gave way, and I crashed through into a dark interior, slammed on brakes, killed the engine. Sudden silence except for my breathing and the settling creak of the vehicle. My eyes adjusted slowly. The garage contained 3 vehicles, 2 motorcycles and a pickup truck. The truck's tires were flat, engine compartment open and stripped. But the motorcycles looked intact. And against the back wall, jackpot, shelving units with containers, some labeled in Thai but recognizable shapes. Fuel containers. I grabbed my machete and climbed out of the vehicle, moving fast. Outside, I could hear the infected converging on the garage, drawn by the crash noise. I had maybe 3 minutes before they arrived in force. The first container I checked was full. Diesel, I could tell by the smell. 5 liters, maybe more. I hauled it to my vehicle, dumped it in the tank. Fuel gauge immediately started climbing. Second container, empty. Third, half full of something that might have been gasoline. Fourth, full of 2-stroke mix. Useless for my diesel engine, but I took it anyway because who knew what I'd need later. Sounds outside. The grinding throat noise of infected, multiple individuals. Shadows moving past the broken doorway. I grabbed 2 more containers, 1 full, 1 partially full, and loaded them. Then I climbed back into the driver's seat, turned the key, prayed the engine would start. It caught on the 3rd try. The noise brought infected flooding through the broken doorway. 5, 10, 15 of them, filling the garage, pressing against my bamboo cage. Hands grabbed at the poles, faces pressed close enough that I could see the clouded white eyes, the slack jaws, the complete absence of anything human behind the meat. I put the vehicle in reverse and floored it. Crashed backward through the garage's rear wall, corrugated metal and rotted wood that gave way easier than the doors. Infected clung to the bamboo, being dragged along. One got caught between the vehicle and a support post and came apart with sounds I'll never forget. Then I was clear, in open air behind the building, infected still grabbing but falling away as I accelerated. Found a road leading back toward the main route, took it faster than was safe, the vehicle bouncing violently over ruts and rocks. A kilometer from the village, I stopped to check damage and take stock. The bamboo armor was battered, a quarter of the poles broken or bent, gaps in the coverage. But it had done its job. The vehicle itself seemed intact, still running despite sounds that suggested major mechanical problems. And I now had maybe 40 liters of diesel total, enough for several days of driving if I was conservative. I also had a new understanding. Scavenging in infected territory was possible, but it required speed, planning, and acceptance that not every run would succeed. I drove south for another 2 hours before darkness forced me to stop. Found a place where the road crossed a stream, parked the vehicle on a raised bank with water on 3 sides, natural barrier against infected approach. Climbed into the cargo area, arranged my supplies around me as makeshift walls, and tried to sleep. The infected came, of course. They always came. Sound of the engine had marked my presence, and they followed that memory even hours later. I heard them splashing in the stream, unable to cross effectively. Just as Zenith had said, they lacked coordination for anything requiring complex movement. Some tried anyway, got swept downstream. Others just stood at the water's edge, swaying slightly, waiting for something. I listened to the radio instead of sleeping. Sable was connecting survivors, calling for anyone in Kanchanaburi province. Group of 9 attempting to reach the river crossing at Thongpa Phum. Looking for route information, infected density estimates. Anyone? Static. "This is Granite," a new voice responded. Man, older, accent that might have been Australian. "Thong Pa Phum is gone. Overrun weeks ago. Tell them to avoid. Better route is through Sankla Buri. Cross at the dam if it's still standing. Watch for herds. Big migration happened last week going south." "Acknowledged, Granite. Thank you." Relaying to the group. More static. Then another voice, this one weak, maybe injured. "Anyone? Is anyone hearing this? I'm alone. I'm hurt. Please." Silence. No one responded. Sometimes no one could. I thought about answering. But what could I offer? I was barely surviving myself, struggling with a barely functional vehicle toward a coast that might offer nothing but more infected and salt water. Day 113 through 120 passed in a blur of driving, scavenging, surviving. I developed a routine. Drive in early morning, 2 to 3 hours maximum. Engine noise attracted infected. But in daylight, I could see them coming. Avoid concentration points. Stop before midday heat. Let engine cool. Conserve fuel. Afternoon. Scout next section of route on foot if terrain allowed, or rest and work on vehicle maintenance. The engine needed constant attention. Oil changes with scavenged motor oil, air filter cleaning, tightening bolts that vibrated loose. Evening. Forage for food, filter water, check radio broadcasts. Sleep in vehicle or nearby trees depending on infected density. Night. Mostly sleepless, listening to infected moving in darkness, radio providing the only human voices. I passed through several abandoned settlements, each one a gamble, potential supplies versus potential death. The larger the settlement, the more infected remained. I learned to judge by afternoon observation, watch the buildings, count infected movement patterns, identify the highest value targets, fuel, food, medical supplies, tools. One village gave me antibiotics and a real first aid kit from what had been a clinic. Another provided canned goods from a shop that had somehow remained mostly intact, shelves still stocked as if waiting for customers. A third had a motorcycle with a full tank of gasoline, wrong fuel type for my vehicle. But I took the whole motorcycle, strapped it to my cargo area, figuring I could use it if the main vehicle failed. I also found bodies. So many bodies. Most were infected dead, destroyed by survivors who'd fought and failed, by starvation, by injury. But some were clearly suicides. People who'd chosen their own end rather than infection or slow starvation or going insane from isolation. I didn't judge them. Some days I understood completely. Day 121 brought a complication. Roadblock. Not a natural obstacle, but a deliberate barrier across the road. Vehicles pulled sideways, logs, debris, creating a wall 3 meters high. And behind it, movement. I stopped 50 meters back, engine idling, studying the situation. This was organized. Survivors had built this, which meant people, which meant unpredictability. "Turn off engine and get out with hands visible," a voice called from behind the barrier. Male, speaking English, amplified somehow. "Do it now or we shoot." Not really a choice. I killed the engine. Sudden silence except for ticking as metal cooled, and climbed out slowly, hands raised. 3 figures emerged from behind the barrier, all holding rifles. They approached cautiously, spreading out, maintaining clear fields of fire. Professional, military training maybe, or at least someone who'd watched them work. The leader was a woman, maybe 40, with short gray hair and a face like weathered stone. Thai features, but she spoke English without accent. "You alone?" "Yes. Bit south for survival tourist, aren't you?" She gestured at my vehicle. "That thing even runs?" "Got me this far." She laughed, short and sharp. Must have. You come from the mountains? Yeah. Research station before everything ended. Been surviving in the jungle. She studied me for a long moment, weighing something. Then, we're not raiders. We're holding this road, controlling who passes. Infected are one problem, but assholes with guns are another. We've turned back 3 groups already. So I need to know, what are your intentions? Heading for the coast, trying to find a boat, get to an island. Smart. Islands are the play, assuming you can reach them. You carrying anything besides supplies, weapons, medicine? Some antibiotics, basic first aid. Machetes, that's it for weapons. She glanced at the other 2. Some silent communication passing between them. We're doing the same thing. Not immediately, but we're building toward it. Got a group of 23 holding this position until we can organize proper transport and supplies for a coastal run. You want to join up? You're welcome. You want to pass through? Fine. But you'll need to contribute something. Toll system keeps everyone honest. Joining a group of 23. The idea was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. Safety in numbers. Shared knowledge and skills. Human contact beyond radio voices, but also complicated social dynamics, resource sharing, increased visibility to infected and potentially hostile groups. What kind of toll? Fuel, food, medicine, tools, or information? What you got? I thought fast. Information. I've been monitoring radio broadcasts, tracking survivor groups, learning infected behavior patterns. I can share everything I know. She considered this. Talk. I spent 30 minutes telling her everything. Zenith's broadcasts and protocols, Cardinal's experiences, Sable's network, observed infected behavior, scavenging strategies, vehicle armor techniques. She listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. When I finished, she said, "That's worth passage. Plus, I want to know about this Zenith. We've heard fragments, but you seem to have more complete information. Come to our camp, spend the night, brief the group. Tomorrow, you can continue south." It wasn't really an offer I could refuse. 3 rifles made their position clear. But she seemed genuine. And the idea of sleeping somewhere with actual security, of talking to real humans in person, was overwhelming. Their camp was 2 kilometers off the main road, hidden in a former logging compound. 23 people, like she'd said, ranging from teenagers to elderly. Organized in a way that spoke of leadership and planning, defined sleeping areas, cooking rotation, guard posts, even a latrine system. The gray-haired woman introduced herself as Lawan, former park ranger, now de facto leader. She introduced me to the others. Too many names to remember. They were a mix. Tide locals, foreign tourists caught by the outbreak, a few who'd come from other survivor groups that had failed or fractured. That evening, they fed me real food. Rice and vegetables from a garden they'd started, fish from the river. I briefed them on everything I knew while we ate, answering questions, sharing observations. They contributed their own experiences, and I learned things I hadn't known. The infected were evolving. Not biologically. No one thought they could adapt that fast, but behaviorally. Learning in whatever limited way their damaged brains allowed. Some groups had observed infected using simple tools. Others reported what seemed like basic communication between infected, coordinated hunting behaviors. "We saw it 3 weeks ago," a man named Davuth said. He'd been a teacher before, spoke careful English. Group of infected, maybe 20, working together to break into a house where survivors were hiding, not just pushing randomly, organized, some at the door, some at windows, timing their attacks. They got in. We heard the screaming. Delta 7 variant, I said. Zenith mentioned it. Enhanced problem solving, pack coordination. If they're getting smarter, we're fucked, someone muttered. They're not getting smarter, Lawan countered. They're adapting basic behaviors. Big difference. Means we need to adapt faster. Speak, you said this Zenith broadcasts at dawn and dusk? Usually, not always. Tomorrow morning, we'll listen together. See if we can contact her, get direct information. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in over 100 days. Just a cot with a thin mattress. But compared to my hammock or the vehicle's cargo bed, it was luxury beyond measure. And I slept surrounded by other people, their breathing, their small movements, the sense of shared space. Should have been comforting. Instead, I lay awake, hyper-aware of every sound and able to relax. Months alone had rewired something in my brain. Solitude had become safety. Company felt dangerous. At dawn, we gathered around their radio, a better unit than mine, running off a car battery and proper antenna. Lawan tuned to the frequency I'd given her, and we waited. Static. Minutes of it. Then, this is Zenith. Dawn broadcast. Current intelligence update. Coastal regions continue to show decreased infected density, but coastal survivor populations are experiencing supply challenges. Fresh water is critical concern. Island locations must have natural water sources or survivors face dehydration within days. Do not assume islands are automatically viable. Scout before committing. Confirmed survivor communities exist on islands in Nga Bay, Ko Chang, and Ko Kut. These locations report stable populations and agricultural development. Recommend coastal survivors prioritize these known safe zones rather than random island selection. Lawan grabbed a microphone. Zenith, this is Lawan at coordinates Charlie 72 Mike. Do you copy? Static. Zenith, requesting confirmation on Ko Chang status. We have a group preparing coastal migration. Over. Nothing. She doesn't respond, I said. Never has to anyone. She just broadcasts. One-way communication? What's the point? Information without interaction. Maybe she's protecting her location. Maybe she doesn't have resources to respond to everyone who'd call. Maybe she's automated somehow. Davuth frowned. You think Zenith might not be a person? She sounds like a person, but her broadcasts are so regular, so structured, and she's been consistent for months. I don't know. We listened to the rest of her broadcast, detailed protocols for water purification, observations about infected behavior during monsoon season, estimates of survival rates in different terrain types. 15 minutes exactly, then silence. Ko Chang, Lawan said, pulling out a map. That's here. Maybe 80 kilometers southeast. Island's big, mountainous, had resorts before. If there's a stable survivor community there, that's our target. You'd need boats, I said. The crossing is maybe 5 kilometers. Infected can't swim well, but they can get into boats if you're not careful during boarding. We've been thinking about that. There's a marina at Trat, maybe 60 kilometers from here. Used to be fancy, sailboats and yachts. If even a few boats are still functional, we could make the crossing. I looked at the map, tracing routes with my finger. I'm heading that direction anyway. Trat's on my route to the coast. Travel together, Lawan proposed. Your vehicle as scout, our trucks following. Combined group has better odds. We reach Trat, we help each other acquire boats, then we both go to Ko Chang. It made sense logically. But joining a group, committing to their timeline and decisions, giving up the independence that had kept me alive. I need to think about it, I said. Fair enough. But we're leaving in 3 days. Spent 2 months preparing, and monsoon season is ending soon, windows closing. I spent those 3 days helping them prepare. They had 2 trucks, both larger than my vehicle, both armor-plated with scavenged metal instead of bamboo. They'd welded frames, reinforced glass, created firing ports. Impressive work that made my setup look primitive. But my vehicle was quieter, more maneuverable, and traveling alone meant I could abandon and run without worrying about others. On the 3rd day, I made my decision. I'm going solo, I told Lawan. But I'll scout ahead, stay on the radio, give you route information, warn about infected concentrations. We can coordinate without being together. She didn't look surprised. Fair. You've been alone long enough that group dynamics feel dangerous, I get it. But remember, alone is only a strategy until it isn't. At some point, you'll need people. Maybe, maybe not. Ko Chang, she said. We'll see you there. I left the next morning before dawn, wanting to get distance before their louder trucks started moving. My vehicle felt different now. Smaller, more vulnerable, but also nimble and fast. Mine. The road to Trat was better than the mountain routes had been. Still damaged, still dangerous, but more maintained before the collapse. I made good time, driving in bursts, stopping to scout, moving again. Day 129, I reached the outskirts of Trat. The city was worse than any settlement I'd seen. Not destroyed, but transformed. Buildings stood intact but empty, streets choked with abandoned vehicles and debris, everything covered in the green growth of jungle reclaiming civilization. And infected. Thousands of them. I stopped on a hill overlooking the city, using my binoculars to study the situation. They were everywhere. Wandering streets, pressed against buildings, clustered in intersections. No organization, just raw numbers that made any direct approach suicide. The marina was on the coast, visible as a cluster of masts and structures maybe 3 kilometers south of the city center. Getting there meant either driving through the city, impossible with these infected numbers, or finding an alternate route. I studied the maps. A coastal road ran along the waterfront, bypassing most of the city center. It would mean driving through residential areas instead of downtown, hopefully lower infected density. Still dangerous, but maybe survivable. I radioed Lawan. This is Kasper. Trat is heavily infested. Thousands of infected. Do not approach from the north. I'm attempting coastal route approach to Marina. Will report status. Her voice crackled back. Acknowledged. We're 1 day behind you. We'll hold position until we hear back. Be careful. Always am. I approached from the east, following back roads that the maps showed as residential streets. The infected were scattered here, tens instead of thousands. I drove slowly, engine just above idle, trying to minimize sound. Several infected turned toward me, followed for a while, gave up when I stayed ahead. The coastal road was a disaster. Fallen trees, debris from storm surge, sections washed away completely. But it was passable with care. I navigated around obstacles, sometimes driving on the beach itself when the road was blocked. Then I saw the marina. Dozens of boats. Everything from small fishing vessels to large yachts. Some had sunk at their moorings, others were clearly damaged, but many looked intact. This was exactly what we needed, and it was surrounded by infected. Not the thousands from the city center, but enough. Maybe 200 congregated around the marina buildings and docks. They'd been drawn here by something. Other survivors attempting the same plan, probably. Now they wandered in aimless patterns, waiting for new stimulus. I parked 50 meters from the marina entrance and studied the situation. I needed to get closer, examine boats, determine which were functional. But approaching on foot through 200 infected was suicide, unless I created a distraction. The motorcycle I'd been carrying suddenly had a purpose. I unstrapped it, checked fuel, still half a tank, and spent an hour rigging a system. Throttle locked open with wire, something heavy on the seat to keep weight on the back tire for traction, steering wedged straight. It was crude, but it might work. I positioned the motorcycle on the road, pointing away from the marina, toward the city center. Kicked it to life. Engine noise immediately drawing infected attention, then jumped back to my vehicle as the motorcycle roared forward. It made it maybe 20 meters before hitting something and crashing, but that was enough. The noise brought infected running from multiple directions, converging on the fallen bike. 200 infected suddenly became 100 as half the group was drawn toward the sound. I had maybe 5 minutes before they drift back. I grabbed my machete, a backpack with essential supplies, and ran for the docks. The marina office was a disaster. Broken windows, scattered papers, dried blood on the floor. But it had keys. Dozens of labeled keys hanging on a board, each one representing a boat. I grabbed a handful that looked promising and ran for the docks. The first boat I checked was sunk, just the mast showing above water. Second was damaged, hull cracked, clearly not seaworthy. Third was locked with a chain I couldn't break. Fourth was a sailboat, maybe 10 meters long, cabin cruiser style. The key worked. The cabin was intact. Engine controls looked functional. I checked fuel gauge, showed quarter tank, enough to get offshore. Checked supplies, some canned food, life jackets, fishing equipment, navigation charts. This could work. Infected were returning to the marina, drawn by my movement or maybe just random wandering. I didn't have time to fully evaluate the boat, to check every system. It was now or never. I cast off the mooring lines, started the engine. It caught immediately, running smooth and quiet compared to my land vehicle, and motored slowly away from the dock. Infected poured onto the dock behind me, reaching, falling into the water, thrashing. But I was away, moving into open water, feeling the boat respond to controls. I'd done it. I had a boat. Now I just needed to figure out how to sail it, navigate to Ko Chang, and somehow survive whatever I found there. I radioed Lawan. "This is Kasper. Marina is accessible but hot. 200 infected, maybe more. I've acquired a sailboat, 10-meter cabin cruiser. Recommend you approach during rain if possible. Use distraction tactics. Multiple boats available. Over." Static, then her voice. "Copy that. Good work. We'll be there tomorrow morning. Save us a nice boat. I'll leave you the keys. I'm heading for Ko Chang now." Pause. "Now? Don't you want to wait, coordinate?" "Windows closing, remember? Monsoon season ending. I've got a boat, I've got supplies, I've got a destination. Time to move." "Fair enough. See you on the island, Kasper." "See you there." I turned the boat south, following the coastline, watching the marina recede behind me. Lawan's group would arrive tomorrow, would figure out their own boat acquisition, or they wouldn't. Either way, I was committed now. The ocean was strange after months in the jungle, too open, too exposed, nothing to hide behind or climb. But there were no infected here. The water was empty except for my boat and the endless blue horizon. I consulted the navigation charts, trying to remember basic seamanship from a class I'd taken years ago. Ko Chang was roughly 40 kilometers southeast. With decent weather and the engine, maybe 4 hours travel. The engine had other plans. 2 hours into the journey, it started sputtering. I checked fuel. Still showed quarter tank, but the gauge might be lying. Checked oil. Checked connections I barely understood. The engine died. Sudden silence except for waves against the hull and wind in the rigging. I tried restarting. Click, click, nothing. Battery, fuel, electrical problem? I had no way to diagnose, no tools to repair. But I had sails. I'd never sailed before. Had no idea what I was doing. But the boat had sails, and I had wind. And drowning in sight of salvation seemed like a particularly bitter end. It took me an hour to figure out the basic rigging, which lines controlled which sail, how to raise them, how to trim for direction. The boat handled terribly under my inexperienced control, zigzagging, occasionally almost capsizing when I got the balance wrong. But I was moving, slowly, erratically, but toward Ko Chang. The island appeared on the horizon around sunset, a dark mass against the sky, mountainous and green. I aimed for it, adjusting sails constantly, fighting the boat's tendency to do everything except what I wanted. As darkness fell, I could see lights on the island. Actual electric lights, not just fires. That meant power generation, organization, successful survivor community. That meant hope. I sailed through the night, afraid to anchor and drift, afraid to approach the island in darkness and accidentally crash. Just maintained position as best I could, adjusting sails, fighting exhaustion, watching those lights like beacons. Dawn came gradually, revealing the island in detail. Mountains, jungle, beaches, and along one section of coast, structures, buildings, docks, boats at anchor, survivors. I sailed toward them, awkward and slow. As I got closer, I could see people on the docks, watching my approach. Several held weapons, rifles, crossbows, maintaining security. Smart. I waved as I got within shouting distance. Friendly, survivor from mainland, requesting permission to land. One figure, tall and lean, shouted back, "Cut your sails and drift. We'll bring you in." I fumbled with the rigging, managing to drop the sails in a tangled mess. The boat drifted on momentum toward the dock, where two people with poles guided it in and secured mooring lines. The tall figure approached as I climbed onto the dock, legs shaky after hours on water. She was maybe 30, Thai features, hair bleached by sun and salt, wearing practical clothes and carrying herself with authority. "I'm Somchai," she said. "Welcome to Ko Chang. We don't see many solo arrivals. You came from Trat?" "Originally from the Cardamom Mountains, research station. Been surviving in the jungle for months, finally made it to coast." She studied me for a moment, evaluating. "You're the one Zenith mentioned." "What?" "This morning's broadcast. She specifically mentioned a survivor named Kasper, traveling solo, attempting island migration. Said you had valuable intelligence about mainland conditions and infected behavior. Recommended we provide shelter and integration." I stared at her. "Zenith knows my name?" "How?" "You'll have to ask her." Somchai smiled slightly. "She's here, on the island. Has been for the last 3 months." The world tilted slightly. All those broadcasts, that precise voice providing information to scattered survivors. And she was here. Had been here while I struggled in the jungle. "I want to meet her." "Most people do." "Come on, I'll take you to the compound. You can clean up, eat, rest. Then we'll see about introductions." As we walked into the settlement, real buildings, organized streets, gardens and solar panels, and all the infrastructure of civilization rebuilt in miniature. I thought about everything that had brought me here. Jules dying in that tent, 62 days in a treehouse, scavenging through infected-filled villages, the desperate drive south in a bamboo-armored vehicle, learning to sail a boat I barely understood. And now I was here. An island with electricity and organization and other survivors. A place that might actually be safe. Maybe Lawan had been right. Maybe alone was only a strategy until it wasn't. The compound Somchai led me to was impressive. A former resort converted into a survivor community. Maybe 60 people living in modified bungalows, with central facilities for cooking, water treatment, power generation. They'd built walls, established guard posts, created something that looked almost like society. She brought me to a shower facility, actual running water, solar heated, and told me to clean up while she arranged food and a meeting with Zenith. I stood under the water for 10 minutes, watching months of jungle wash away, feeling like I was shedding a skin. Clean clothes were waiting when I finished. Simple but clean, they fit well enough. Food was waiting too. Rice, fish, vegetables, fruit. I ate mechanically, too exhausted to really taste it. My mind stuck on the coming meeting. Zenith. The voice that had kept me sane, provided the information that kept me alive. She was here. Somchai returned after I'd eaten. She'll see you now, but I should warn you, she's not what most people expect. Meaning, you'll see. She led me to a building slightly apart from the others, more technical looking. Inside was a radio room, multiple transmitters, receivers, power systems, recording equipment. And sitting at the central console, surrounded by notebooks and maps and schedules, was a girl, not a woman. A girl, maybe 14 or 15 years old, with glasses and dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked up as we entered, her expression serious and focused. "Kasper?" she said in that voice I'd heard for months. The same precise pronunciation, the same measured tone. But coming from a teenager in a radio room, instead of some imagined military or scientific authority. "I'm glad you made it. Your survival represents valuable data about solo highland to coast migration under current conditions." I stared at her. This was Zenith? This child? "You're surprised," she said, not a question. "Most people are. They expect someone older, more official. But age is irrelevant. Information is what matters. Accurate information, reliably delivered, saves lives. Everything else is aesthetics." "You've been broadcasting for months," I managed, "providing intelligence to survivors across Southeast Asia. How?" "Data compilation and analysis. I have access to multiple radio networks, survivor reports, pre-collapse information systems. I aggregate, verify, analyze, then broadcast. The format is designed for maximum information density, with minimum transmission time to conserve power and reduce interception risk." She spoke like she was explaining a science project, which, in a way, I suppose she was. Why not respond to people who call? Why stay anonymous? Responding creates obligation and expectation. If I answer one person, I must answer all. If I provide specific advice and it fails, trust degrades. One-way broadcast maintains credibility through consistency, and anonymity prevents targeting by infected, by hostile survivor groups, by anyone who might see information control as a resource to capture or eliminate. It made sense in a cold, logical way. But it also seemed lonely, isolating. This teenager sitting in a room full of equipment, broadcasting to the world while remaining disconnected from it. "The intelligence you've gathered is valuable," Zenith continued, pulling out a notebook. "I'd like to debrief you thoroughly about your observations. Infected behavior in highland jungle environments. scavenging strategies in medium-density population areas, vehicle modification techniques, solo survival psychology. All of this can inform future broadcasts and help other survivors. You want to interview me? Yes. Over the next few days systematically, we can improve survival rates across multiple regions if we consolidate and distribute your experience. You saved yourself. Now help save others. How could I refuse that? I'd survived when so many hadn't. Riven and his group in Sri Ambel, Cardinal and his 17 becoming 11, Jules and Noor and all the others from the research station. If my experience could help prevent more deaths, prevent more people from dying alone and scared in the dark. Okay, I said. I'll tell you everything. Over the next week, I did exactly that. Spent hours each day with Zenith, whose real name was Apinya, though she preferred her call sign, describing everything I'd learned. She took meticulous notes, asked precise questions, cross-referenced with reports from other survivors. I learned that Ko Chang's survivor community was thriving relative to mainland groups. They had approximately 70 people, sustainable food production, fresh water sources, and successful infected defense protocols. The island's isolation meant infected couldn't reach them except by boat, and they destroyed or secured all watercraft on nearby coasts to prevent accidental drifts. Other survivors trickled in, a few per week, arriving by boat from the mainland. Lawan's group arrived 5 days after me, having successfully acquired boats and made the crossing. They'd lost 2 people to infected during boat acquisition, but 21 made it. You were right to leave when you did, Lawan told me over dinner one evening. Waiting would have meant losing our window. Weather's getting worse. 2 groups tried the crossing yesterday. Both capsized in rough seas. Sometimes solo is the right strategy. But living on Ko Chang, I found myself valuing community in ways I hadn't in the jungle. Shared meals, conversation that wasn't just radio voices, the ability to sleep without constant vigilance, knowing guards were watching perimeters, human contact that felt safe rather than threatening. Apinya broadcast twice daily, continuing her Zenith routine. I listened to each broadcast, hearing my own observations folded into her intelligence updates, knowing that information was reaching survivors across the region. Helping people I'd never meet, would never know. 1 month after arriving on Ko Chang, I stood on the beach at dawn, looking across water toward the mainland. Somewhere over there, people were still surviving in trees and bunkers and vehicles, still fighting, still hoping. The radio crackled. Apinya's morning broadcast, reliable as sunrise. This is Zenith. Current intelligence update. Island survivor communities continue to demonstrate highest long-term viability. Ko Chang community now stable at 93 individuals with successful agricultural development. Other confirmed island sanctuaries include Ko Kut, Ko Samet, and Ko Phangan. Mainland survivors should prioritize coastal migration during favorable weather windows. Solo migration remains viable with proper preparation. Survival rate approximately 20% for prepared individuals, 5% for unprepared. Key factors include. Her voice continued, precise and measured, carrying information to desperate people hiding in darkness. A 14-year-old girl in a radio room, saving lives with data and discipline. I thought about my 147 days of survival, from a research station to a treehouse, to a bamboo-armored vehicle, to a sailboat, to here. All the close calls, the terror, the loneliness, the tiny decisions that meant living or dying. And I thought about what Somchai had said when I arrived. "You're the one," Zenith mentioned. Apinya had tracked my progress somehow, through radio monitoring probably, piecing together fragments of broadcasts, mapping my journey. Had she guided me here deliberately? Provided information specifically calibrated to help my survival because she'd identified me as someone who might make it? I'd never know. She wouldn't tell me even if I asked. Information and results were what mattered to her, not credit or recognition. The sun climbed higher, burning off morning mist. Another day on Ko Chang, another day of survival that now meant building rather than just not dying. Lawan approached along the beach, her morning patrol route. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep. Jungle habits die hard. Give it time. Eventually you'll remember what sleeping through the night feels like." She stood beside me, looking toward the mainland. Samchai's organizing another rescue mission. There's a group stranded on an island near Trat. 15 people, radio contact, but no boats. We're taking 2 vessels, bringing them back. Could use someone with mainland experience. When? 3 days. Weather window before monsoon season hits full force. I thought about it. The mainland with all its dangers, infected and collapsed civilization and constant threat. I'd escaped it, made it to safety, survived when most didn't. But 15 people were stranded, waiting for help that might not come. "I'll go," I said. Lawan smiled. "Thought you might. You're not the hide-in-a-tree type anymore, are you?" Maybe not. Or maybe I'd learned that surviving alone was one thing, but helping others survive meant something more. The rescue mission left on schedule. 2 boats, 8 people total, me included. We sailed through rough seas toward Trat, toward the island where 15 strangers were waiting, hoping, surviving one more day. As we approached the coordinates Samchai had provided, I could see them on the beach, waving, shouting, celebrating that help had finally arrived. 15 people who'd made it this far, who'd held on through everything that had tried to kill them. We brought them home to Ko Chang. All 15, plus supplies and equipment they'd salvaged, added them to the growing community, integrated them into our survival structure. And that night, Apinya broadcast an update. Ko Chang community, now stable at 108 individuals. Successful rescue operation demonstrates viability of coordinated survivor support networks. Islands remain optimal long-term sanctuaries, but mainland to island migration is possible with proper planning and community support. Survival is not merely individual effort, but collaborative adaptation to changed circumstances. I listened to her precise voice, thinking about collaborative adaptation, about how I'd survived alone for so long, but how real survival meant more than just not dying. Meant building something, helping others, creating infrastructure for a future that might still exist. The radio crackled with other voices after Apinya's broadcast. Survivors across the region, checking in, sharing information, connecting. Cardinal's voice was among them, reporting from a new location in the Vietnamese highlands. He'd survived. His group had survived. "This is Cardinal, day 203. We made it to the coast, acquired boats, found an island. It's not perfect, but it's ours. We're farming, fishing, living. To anyone listening, don't give up. The islands are real. Safety is possible. Just keep moving, keep trying, keep surviving. We'll see you out here." I smiled, remembering his broadcasts from months ago. His voice that had kept me company in the treehouse made me feel less alone. "This is Kasper," I transmitted. "Cardinal, this is Kasper from Ko Chang. I heard you. Congratulations on making it. Keep broadcasting. We're all still here, still fighting." Static then. "Kasper, you made it too. Hell yes. See everyone, we can do this. We are doing this. More voices joined. Granite reporting from Thailand, Sable connecting groups, others I'd heard over months of monitoring. A network of survivors, scattered across hundreds of kilometers, linked by radio and shared determination to not just survive, but live. As the broadcasts continued into the night, I walked back to my bungalow, exhausted but satisfied. 147 days of survival. From researcher to refugee to survivor to something more. Tomorrow there'd be more work. More rescue missions, more building, more adaptation. The infected still controlled the mainland, still threatened anyone who ventured into their territory. The world was still ended in all the ways that mattered. But we were still here, still human, still fighting. And sometimes, that was enough.